Welcome back, America. As Washington roars back into action with Donald Trump now in the presidency and his agenda starting to unfold minute by minute, literally, in Washington. One of the big questions we're all facing is where are we going to save those billions of dollars that have run up our deficit and put a burden on American taxpayers and on inflation? Our next guest came up with a really good idea. In fact, she's been doing a lot of research on this in conjunction with some great scientists around the country. Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis from New York says we could stop and save billions by stopping abusive research on animals in federal agencies. That's a good idea. Joining us now, the Congresswoman herself. Congresswoman, good to have you on the show.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
I don't think a lot of people would believe until you brought this article out that there's $20 billion a year in spending that goes into animal research, a lot of it abusive. You and the White Coast Waste Project came up with some pretty astounding numbers.
Yeah, look, I don't think most Americans know that their tax dollars are being used in this way to literally abuse animals with cruel and inhumane and unnecessary experiments that are not doing anything to improve public health. And it's actually crazy to learn that we have hundreds of thousands of animals that are locked up in cages, that are in federal labs, or labs that we, the U.S. taxpayer, are funding, cats, dogs, monkeys, rabbits, other animals, and that these unnecessary tests are taking place all around the country. And we're even funding experiments taking place overseas and in countries that dislike us. We recently put a prohibition on animal testing in Russia. We also saw that there was animal testing taking place in the Wuhan lab. And we were funding these experiments, and it's still taking place in other countries that have subpar safety conditions. So that not only is, an unnecessary cruel experiment on the animal, but it could potentially cause the next pandemic.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And I think you're right. I think most Americans don't even realize to what degree this is happening. And from what I have learned from the good folks over at White Coat Waste Project, as you said, most of these experiments don't really benefit the public. If there are any of these experiments that by some grace of God are actually doing some good, isn't there a way to transfer that to a different style of experimenting?
Yeah, well, if you look at the list of the experiments that are being conducted, I mean, they were doing transgender hormone therapy on monkeys. That's what they're using your tax dollars on. And there were other horrific experiments that were taking place using beagles, using cats. We were able to work with White Coat Waste to expose these and stop many of these experiments. We recently had another win ending this horrific experiments in which they were drilling the skulls of cats, and this was taking place at the VA. That has now ceased. I mean, so there is really a long list of experiments that were being conducted. And, this organization is great because they've actually helped rescue beagles from not just the labs, but beagles from the breeding facilities that were doing business with the labs, and get those beagles adopted and into loving homes. And so there is a bipartisan group that has been working with White Coat Waste to expose this. And the more people learn about it, the outrage just grows. And, we have so many great people on our side. Lara Trump has been one of our allies. Right. She has also been very vocal on this issue of ending animal testing. As a matter of fact, she was the inspiration for the first Trump administration to actually put forward a plan to end animal testing. Sadly, when President Joe Biden came into office, he rolled back that plan. And so I think you have a large number of members in Congress who want to work with the new Trump administration to get us on a path to end these experiments and to save this taxpayer money. And I think, look, whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene or Greg Steube, Dina Titus on the other side of the aisle, there is a growing coalition of individuals here in the House of Representatives that want to see an end to this inhumane and costly practice.
Yeah, it's such an extraordinary work. First, you had to do a lot of education with White Coat Labs. Now you got a very important piece of legislation called the Help Pets Act. Tell us a little bit. You just reintroduced it. What does it do?
Yeah, well, I have a number of pieces of legislation that are you would consider animal rights bills, but the the Help Pets Act actually wants to transition these animals from labs to homes. And it's basically a program to get these animals adopted and into loving homes so they don't have to suffer these terrible experiments. So that's one bill. I'm also a sponsor of what's called Goldie's Act, which was named after a golden retriever that was abused and neglected in a puppy mill facility in Iowa. USDA came, they did their evaluations and inspection that they were required to do. They saw that the animal was starving. She was in very, very hot conditions without food. And instead of actually removing the animal, they just did the paperwork and they went back and filed it. And the animal stayed there and died. And so Goldie's Act would require that USDA notify local and state law enforcement to have that abused animal removed from the environment. And so that would go a long way. We're actually building a lot of support for that as well. I think pieces of that can get into the Farm Bill, which would be a great win. And we're working with people like Zach Nunn from Iowa, who actually represents the area where Goldie passed away. And we're hoping we can get some wins with ASPCA. We've been working with them on this legislation.
Huge. Wow.
Congresswoman, it's impossible to separate the issue of the Food and Drug Administration and experimentation and Anthony Fauci. And as we all know, this preemptive pardon for Anthony Fauci, is that the end of the road for him, or are House Republicans going to still seek accountability and transparency on what he's done?
Yeah, I mean, look, with all these pardons, it begs the question: what did these individuals do that they received a pardon? We've, as part of the COVID Select Subcommittee, we really drilled down into the money that was sent from the NIH to the EcoHealth Alliance that then made its way to Communist China to fund experiments at the Wuhan lab. As a result of our work, we actually ensured that EcoHealth and its director, Peter Daszak, do not receive another dollar in federal funds. But you brought up the FDA as well, and I want to point out that there's another piece of legislation that we have that would end the requirement of animal testing for cosmetics. Now, this is a bill that you have the animal rights groups as well as the cosmetics industry supportive of. And it's a no-brainer when you have both sides, right, supporting this bill. And they want to move forward without this again, costly, inhumane, unnecessary animal testing requirement that the FDA imposes. We should do it. Let's do it. And we have a large number of co-sponsors on that bill. I'm a co-chair of the Animal Welfare Caucus. And so we're hoping that we can get that through this year. And another thing is some sunscreens, for example, because of the U.S. requirements on animal testing, some sunscreens from France, for example, cannot come to the United States because of these outdated and antiquated requirements that they be tested on animals. And so I think in this day and age, there's many other ways to test these products and make sure that they are safe for humans without exploiting these poor innocent animals and subjecting them to abuse.
Yeah, I think a lot of Americans can get behind that very quickly. You have done so much on this issue, Congresswoman. I think all of us who care for animals and have pets are deeply grateful for the work. And I know a lot more ahead of us, but I know you're going to stay on it. Great to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, great honor to have you on. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, former Congressman Louis Gohmert will be here to discuss President Trump hitting the ground running, and I do mean running. We'll have more of that right after these messages.